Welcome to the World Open Innovation Conversations. My name is Marcel Bogers and I'm a professor of open and collaborative innovation at Eindhoven University of Technology.
And my name is Marisol Menendez. I'm an open innovation practitioner enthusiast. I'm CEO of Pilacato, where we work around open innovation and ecosystem orchestration.
And we're very happy to be joined here today by Anne-Kristin Zobel, who is, on the one hand, I think can say a long-time friend and colleague from back in the days. So we'll talk more about that history also today, but we're very happy to have you, Anne-Kristin. And we also particularly invited you because you will be one of the keynote speakers at the upcoming World Open Innovation Conference in Bilbao. So we are already looking forward to that. And hopefully we can say a little bit more about what you will talk about at the conference also. But first I wanted to give you opportunity to say a little bit more about yourself, who you are, and what you are currently working on. And then we'll delve into the details later.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much, Marcel and Marisol, for having me here today on the podcast, on the conversations, and also as a keynote speaker at the WOIC conference. I'm very delighted to have that opportunity. So, my name is Anne-Kristin Zobel. I'm an associate professor of management at the University of St. Gallen in beautiful Switzerland, close to the mountains. I think I'll have the opportunity to talk a little bit more about my research later in the podcast. But maybe so far, just to mention, I've been here for about 5 years now, with previous stops at ETH Zurich and at the University of California, Berkeley. And originally, I did my dissertation and my studies at Maastricht University, so in the beautiful yet flat Netherlands.
Still the tree.
That is still the hilly part, but I've increased the slopes since then. And I'm an open innovation scholar at heart, and happy to talk more with you about that.
And Christine, we always like to learn a little bit more about the person we are speaking today. I'm just curious, and maybe some other practitioners are also curious, for the audience, about it. How do you end up dedicating your time to open innovation and innovation? How do you arrive to the area of study?
Right. So I think it was a little bit serendipity and also guidance by important mentors. So it's not like I started, my study programs and I knew it was going to be open innovation right away. But I did know quite early that I wanted to do research. So already during my bachelor studies, I was this, odd person that would read the methods sections in academic articles while everyone else would skip them. So that was already a hint, right? Something might be going on. So I decided after the bachelor's to do a master in research. So that was a new program. I think the Netherlands was quite early in introducing these types of more research-oriented master programs. And I ended up working as a research assistant for a professor at Maastricht University with the name of John Hagedorn. And he is a very prominent established scholar on strategic alliances originally. And so he came to me one day, maybe he didn't know what else I could do for him in my capacity as a research assistant. But he said, hey, there's this, new thing going on called open innovation. I'm not quite sure what this is about. How is this different from strategic alliances? Why don't you go and check it out, right? So that must have been probably around 2008 or so. So it was quite early. So my task was really to look at this very early stage research that was coming up on this topic and find out what it's all about. And to my surprise, when I went into it, I didn't know what to expect, but I really had this realization that this is very different. And it's not just another nuance of strategic alliances, but it's really a fundamental change in how firms think about and strategically approach innovation. And so that's when I got hooked. And I started writing my master thesis on this. And the master thesis turned into a PhD, turned into a postdoc, turned into a professorship, and here I am.
Wow.
And
This is so interesting. I ended up also very early, just assigned the task to implement an open innovation department where nobody knew what was it. And so this way of opening the doors and discovering, I feel it's very exciting. Marcel.
And you also got hooked, right? So you're still working on it as well. Yeah.
Totally.
No, exactly. And I think in general, it's really interesting how these things emerge, like you call it serendipity, right? So it's still in that sense, it's always interesting to look back at, how these things, started and emerged and evolved. And one thing that comes to my mind is also how I think we started to work together, which was also somehow serendipitous in some way. Or at least, what at least comes to my memory, but you can help to refresh it, maybe.
It was very intentional on my end, Marcel.
It wasn't, but my point was, there were some kind of accidental thing, or at least we were, I think, in parallel had some ideas of running some, also at the Academy of Management, like a symposium and a workshop, and I think it was even Henry Chesbrough who was also the one who realized, okay, you're doing this stuff in parallel, maybe you should talk to each other and see how you can collaborate on that. I think this is sort of how we ended up working together. But maybe you can then refresh my memory on or at least how it happened from your side, because I think it's interesting to hear a little bit more. Okay, how these things emerge. What did we do, at those workshops, and what it grew to also.
Yeah. So, obviously, you were one of the scholars that I read about when I did this early stage research, right? You were a few years ahead of me, and you were very early working on this field. So I knew your name. I think we met very early at a conference. I want to say it was the Research Policy Special Issue Conference, maybe. And so I was excited to see that you were on the agenda, and then I don't know if I dared to talk to you or you were so kind enough to talk to me at some point, but I think we did end up talking for quite some time, actually, and I think just felt like we had stuff to talk about and connected well. And I think, the rest is history, right? We did the now infamous PDW at the Academy of Management, which again kind of culminated into something bigger, right? And then you had this crazy, exciting idea of doing an open innovation paper, using open innovation methods in a way, inviting 23 scholars to collaborate on this paper, which I did think was a bit crazy, right? But I was like, yeah, let's go for it, Marcel. And it worked out beautifully, right? And I think it is a piece that has now, kind of left its mark on the field. And then I also remembered that I think it was the second World Open Innovation Conference that we co-organized with Jonathan Sims under Henry Chesborough's leadership. And so, this goes back quite a few years, but we had lots of exciting things going together.
And I can see that there are common ingredients that also rise continuously in our community of open innovation. But of course, Henry Chesbrough doing all these connections as well in a very open innovation-y mindset, like saying, hey, you two guys are working in similar things, you should connect. It's also part of the magic that kicks off.
Oh, absolutely. He's a wonderful matchmaker.
So, Anne-Kristin, so today you keep, of course, working on this. What's your area of study, or how can you explain what's your specialty, or what are you focusing on?
Yeah, so it really was, like I told you, open innovation from the start, right? And then maybe another interesting story here is the other passion that I had when I started with research way back when was dynamic capabilities. And little did I know about this deeper connection between these two fields. So, of course, I had read Henry Chesborough's work when I did this early research on open innovation. And in parallel for my master thesis, I then worked on dynamic capabilities, which, was coined by David Tees. What I then found out, and I really didn't know beforehand, right? As a student, it's not like you know all of these, prestigious scholars. But what I then discovered was that Henry was a student of David, and that both of them were at UC Berkeley. So it was like the universe was giving me a sign, UC Berkeley, like that's the place where I have to go. And so that's what I did during my doctoral studies as an exchange student. And then I liked it so much. I went home, I grabbed what was then my boyfriend, is today my husband, and I took him with me, and we went to Berkeley for another 2 years for the postdoc. So to cut the long story short, kind of my early focus was very much on looking at what types of capabilities do firms need to develop to be able to do open innovation in the first place. So identify, relevant partners, start projects together. But I was also very interested how they would actually capture value from open innovation, right? So either in terms of innovative solutions and products, but I also looked for a while with my advisor at issues like contracting or intellectual property, which is a little bit of a paradox, right? When you think about, you open up, you want to share all of that knowledge. At the same time, you're still a firm and you want to profit from your knowledge. So these were some of the things I was interested in initially. And then when I was in Berkeley, I think I was always a little bit bothered by the fact that I went from university to doing my PhD to doing my postdoc. I mean, did I really understand anything about, firms and industries and how all of that works? So I felt like that was missing, and I was looking for kind of a phenomenon or a context or an industry that I would learn more about and kind of become an expert on. And so that was kind of another serendipitous development where I discovered clean tech and clean energy as kind of a context that I became really passionate about and really excited. So I dived into that and really studied how incumbents in the energy sector, for example, energy utilities, how they could use open innovation, collaborate with startups, for example, who have, clean technology solutions, digital technology solutions, and how they could, via open innovation, really fundamentally transform the energy sector. And since then, I've expanded to other kind of empirical fields. I stayed close to this topic of, big transformation in order to mitigate climate change. And that has become kind of my new passion.
Wow, this is very interesting for our World Open Innovation Conference, no?
No, it is. And maybe you can say a little bit more on what you think of focusing on during that keynote, where you have some time to elaborate some of these issues, right? And also to further delve into later.
Yeah, maybe before diving into the keynote, just for those who are not as aware about the conference on November 5 and 6, we will bring the World Open Innovation every year. We have around the last week of October, the first week of November, the World Open Innovation Conference, which has been running already for 11 years. This will be the 12th, I think. That's 12th edition.
Yeah.
And it was founded by Henry Chesbrough. The important thing, and I'm a practitioner, Marcel is academic, the thing for me as a practitioner, and I fell in love with that since 2015, I think is the first time I went to do WOIC, was this bringing academia and practice together. Of course, my geeky side enjoys going a little bit into academic, but I feel it's very important to get closer whatever we are learning in research. And we've been doing this for a long time. And it's a unique opportunity to have these two worlds come together with all the best papers that are presenting, but also best practices. We will be in Bilbao. And of course, one of the important elements here in the ecosystem is energy. So that's why I was so excited about your talk.
Right. Yes.
Anything I forgot to mention about the conference?
No, it's a good point. I think you covered most of it. So indeed, sort of part of the, let's say, the DNA of the conference is really also to bridge these worlds of theory and practice, as you say. Well, of course, Anne-Kristin and I mean, we've been sort of living that life, when we also worked in particular on the academic side, like when you also joined in the organizing team and with Jonathan, as you mentioned, sort of also taking over from Joel West, who sort of initiated that sort of part of the conference. And then I took over. I was like, okay, in the spirit of open innovation, let me not do it then by myself, but invite some other smart people out there, as we like to say.
Yay.
And that was an interesting experience, but we focus very much on the academic side. And I think that in itself is quite interesting, right? To learn about, okay, how do you actually build that bridge. So you have a little bit your own silo, because you cannot just let go of everything. You still have those academic papers, but then like in the program, we try to look for ways, through other types of sessions, bringing challenges of companies. More recently, we brought in these best practice submissions from practitioners also. So that's what we try to do in the program. And yeah, so we worked in those early days very much on the academic side and getting an interesting academic program there. But do you have any other reflections on that early experience before we delve into?
No, I do think that's very true. I think a lot of innovation on the conference formats happened since then, and I think that's really good. And I think it's really hard to create effective formats for bridging academia and practitioner. I mean, really bridging it. That doesn't just mean that there are academics and there are practitioners and they're sitting in one room, but they're actually doing something productively and they are understanding each other. And I think that later part it doesn't happen automatically. It's not easy. And I think a lot of thoughts by various colleagues of us and by you guys have gone into that, thinking about what are good formats that actually make that interesting for both sides. And so I'm also very excited about that, because I think open innovation really is not just an academic concept, but it is really something that is highly practiced and highly relevant, in industry, across various industries, really.
Oh, definitely. I think in that sense, I mean, both worlds really have so much to learn from each other. And I think probably practice is always ahead of academia in most cases anyway. So, but maybe on that note, you can also say a little bit more about what you have observed, also like in your research, in terms of which is a lens to look at practice also, obviously, and maybe highlight a few things that you think you will focus on in your keynote, to give a bit of a sneak peek into that.
Sure. So I think how I can really relate to the conference theme, which is open innovation in times of uncertainty.
Yes,
I hope I got that right. Okay, good. And I think the way that I look at that, or how it resonates with my work, is that recently my research on open innovation has really looked at how organizations can use open innovation to tackle what other scholars call wicked problems, right? So these are problems that are high in uncertainty, hence the link to the conference theme, right? They're very complex. There's no single solution. The problem and the solutions are ever evolving. There are unintended consequences or kind of nonlinear developments where if you solve one problem, it causes another. So it's very dynamic in a sense. And again, I think this is where the uncertainty comes in. And if we look at those types of problems, really no single company can solve them alone, or no single actor, no single entity can solve them alone, right? And I think this is where open innovation is so powerful, because it gives us, frameworks, concepts, research ideas to look at how can we mobilize knowledge, resources from very different types of actors. How can we bring that together and kind of productively progress on these wicked problems or grand challenges, Marcel, right? Is, I think, another term we could use, where you with Anita McGahan and Henry and other colleagues have also had this editorial on how open innovation links to these grand challenges. So this is what I focus on. I gave you one example already, right, which is the energy sector, Marisol, which I know you also understand very well, that this is a wicked problem, right? Like, how do we go from this linear, predictable, fossil fuel-based energy system to something that's very complex, evolving, uncertain, given policy, geopolitical developments, etc. I think another thing, and it might sound a bit nerdy now, but I'm very excited now about industries like steel or cement, which perhaps initially doesn't sound very sexy, right? It's like, oh, I'm into AI or big tech. Well, there's actually a lot of AI in the cement industry as well. But I think these are industries, first of all, where their products are pervasive, right? We cannot really imagine a society without them. We have to build so many new cities on such a frequent basis that we need these materials, yet they are very problematic in terms of causing a tremendous amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And they are under pressure to really innovate. And this challenge or this problem is so complex, uncertain, and huge that I think they cannot do it alone. And they're turning towards open innovation, right? And for instance, large building materials companies, cement companies working with startups on really radically new technologies, but also with policymakers, with other actors on really big infrastructure problems, right? So this is not, working on the software together or working on a small project, but these are really large infrastructural challenges. And I think, looking at these wicked problems and trying to understand how open innovation can help to address them, that is something that I find really exciting, that I hope I get the chance to talk more about in Bilbao at the World Open Innovation Conference.
It's so relevant for the topic of the conference. Of course, uncertainty is everywhere. I think in one way or another, every day we approach some topic related to the uncertainty and its effects, no? Of course, one thing that we've been discussing recently here with my team is the most common and agreed upon list of wicked problems is the global sustainability goals. No?
Right.
Right, no? And it's interesting that the last goal, I think it's number 17, is partnerships for the goals, which is clearly open innovation.
Right, we should relabel it, don't you think?
Is that and I think it's part of it's a complexity on its own, no? How to establish the right kind of collaborations. And you were talking about dynamic capabilities. How do we, as we move forward in advancing towards the solution of these wicked problems, we also capture value and we keep growing and thriving, no? So this is a mystery. This is very, very interesting across all sectors. And I think those sectors you were saying, like cement and steel, are more complex because how deep they are and solid, no, and averse to change, maybe.
Exactly. And I like the way that you put it. Actually, I do it quite similarly in my teaching. So I have a few courses on open innovation and grand challenges, or open innovation and decarbonization or climate change. And indeed, in one of my first lectures, I do show the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, right? And then usually I say two things. One is exactly what you just said, Marisol, right? It's like, well, open innovation is in the Sustainable Development Goals. It's like, it's right there, right? And then the other thing is that even though there are, of course, also other SDGs, but climate change is kind of like a red thread that goes across many of these 16 goals, right? Synergetically or also in terms of trade-offs. So that is also always my proposition. If we figure out how we can use open innovation to address climate change, then not everything, but a large portion, of the SDGs, we can actually help address.
Can I ask also a kind of nerdy question then?
Yes, join the nerd club.
So I was thinking of that one paper you already referred to, the Boger, Zobel et al., 21 other people, where one of the things we really kind of ended up doing, we can do a whole podcast on how that paper came about, but I mean, one of the things that really emerged through that sort of open, let's say, interaction with all those colleagues is also the importance of addressing some of these issues, open innovation related issues, across different levels of analysis, right? There was also kind of a starting point, but I think what we ended up doing is looking for, okay, where, what are certain themes where you can really, cut across, these different levels of analysis, let's say, right? Because it's not only about the organization, but then how it relates to the individuals and or the ecosystem or the industry, or maybe the wicked problem. We didn't mention that one, but so I think that was sort of really the idea, and what kind of research questions come out of it, right? Because I think the actual problems in the real world out there, don't stick to one unit of analysis, so to say. Yeah.
And I don't know about you, Marcel, but I listen to these smart scholars and actually also ended up doing, what we were all suggesting. So when I studied this open innovation program in the energy sector, for example, I remember the way that I put it is I actually kind of drew a pyramid, right? Where I said, okay, I now want to look at this phenomenon from these different levels of analysis and collect data accordingly and ask research questions accordingly. So I kind of started to look at the open innovation system, so to say, right? So looking at, well, how do all these energy utilities, startups, nonprofit organizations, how they work together as a whole? But I also looked at, project level analysis, for example, at, a single firm, looking at how they're actually trying to get in knowledge into the organization, all the way down to the individuals. So we really, and I'm actually not such a micro person per se or originally, but, and I think, Marisol, you can probably also relate to that as a practitioner. As we were observing what these firms were doing in this open innovation program, we realized it's the people that are doing all of this, right? It's the people that are sitting at the table and they're negotiating, they're thinking about, well, how can I best do this? So there was just no way for us not to study that and not to look into that. So I think actually a large part of that was looking at, we call them boundary spanners, right? So individuals that, have kind of one foot in the organization, one foot out. I think that's kind of the metaphor that Linus Dahlander has in one of these papers, right? And so we looked at how can these boundary spanners actually be successful, right? And transfer knowledge back to their firms. And so I find that very engaging and interesting to indeed look at problems at these different levels of analysis. And I think the concept of open innovation lends itself well to do that, or gives you the freedom to actually do that. So yeah, so smart idea back then by some of these folks, right?
Exactly. So it's very interesting to hear kind of how you relate it to your, also to the research and everything. So maybe you can say also a little bit more about how you how do you like yourself also try to build that bridge between, let's say, theory and practice, right? So of course you already mentioned a couple of things, a couple of ways to do that. Of course you have the teaching, of course you draw on data and practical experiences. So is that sort of how you work with practice, with practitioners, or are there other ways in which you try to do that type of work or make that translation to practice as well?
Yes, I think this has also really been a journey for me. I think, when I started out as a young PhD student, I was very much the theory person, right? I told you, like I didn't have practical experience, right? I didn't really know how to navigate this practitioner world, and so thanks God for Henry, right? So I think that really, when I did my postdoc at UC Berkeley under Henry's mentorship, I think that to me really opened my eyes to, trying to bridge these two worlds and how much value that can generate and how fulfilling that can be. And so I think that was really the first time I was exposed to that and seeing, how Henry does that and how he interacts with practitioners. So I think that was kind of the first milestone, or the first experience that kind of shaped how I do that. I think the second aspect then that really helped me was to go deeper into specific industries and really understand them, because then I do feel like when we're boundary spanners ourselves, we need to have a little bit of that knowledge of the other world, a little bit of that language, so that we can effectively communicate with each other. And I also collaborated with colleagues across disciplinary boundaries. So my colleague Steve Comello, who used to be at Stanford, he was really not in classical management, but he was really in energy. He understood, all of the technologies and so on. So also working in an interdisciplinary way facilitated access to the practitioner world in this industry. And so then I started to collect a lot of empirical research myself through interviewing managers, being there when these companies actually collaborated, observing them. And I think that was kind of the segue to then also think about, okay, now how can we transfer our research results back to practitioners? We did a lot of presentations at these open innovation events. We did playbooks, kind of translating our research findings into a more practitioner-friendly, especially shorter version. So we did a lot of those things. And I think now in St. Gallen, which is known for its motto of from insight to impact, and it's known for its very strong ties to industries, that has also helped me because we have a strong network with practitioners. So I think here it's through research, both getting the data from practitioners, but also translating our findings back to them. It's through teaching, and it's also a lot through executive education that I feel like that is probably a format where you can have the most immediate impact, because I can bring my research findings into this classroom, to managers that can think about how to do this the next day, right? Without any time lag. So I think these are kind of the different ways that I think about this and how I have evolved really in terms of also trying to bridge, this gap.
I'm very curious because this somehow kicks the roll, or how do you say, gets the ball rolling around this connection between industry and academia. And at the end also somehow, I imagine, gives you challenge back into your own research, and it might affect and shape how you see the future of your own research field.
Absolutely.
So what do you see as next steps? Where are the challenges? What's ahead of you here?
Right. So I think, there's so many, it's hard to choose, which is good because that means, Marcel, we still have some work to do,
Lucky.
for at least a few decades. But it should be enough, right? But I think maybe I'll mention 2 or 3. So I think the first area for me really is this intersection of sustainability and open innovation, or these wicked problems, however you may put this, right? So thinking about some of these systemic challenges like climate change that actually put a lot of innovation pressure on firms, and to think about how open innovation can help us alleviate some of these wicked problems. And I think I was very inspired, by the way, talking about the history of the different editions of the World Open Innovation Conference. Marcel, you have to help me when that was. When was the Rome edition?
Rome, yes.
2017.
Yeah.
2017?
17 or 18. Yeah.
So that was when Anita McGahan did the keynote, right? And it was an amazing keynote. Oh my God, I can't even think about that. I'm kind of stepping into those shoes. No, yeah, that is stuff really freaking me out. Okay. But what really inspired me and has, I think, really shaped me is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory of that talk was that one key message that she wanted us to take away is that we have to think about new types of dependent variables for open innovation. Is that also how you recall it? And she was proposing the SDGs, right? So let's look at how open innovation can help us address some of the SDGs, rather than, or in addition to, or not only looking at profitability and growth, right? Which doesn't mean that this is not important, right? I'm not saying that, but she was kind of expanding our view on this. So I think that's the first area. I think definitely the intersection of open innovation and digital innovation has been very hot, will stay very hot. So I'm thinking, for example, about, we have one article where we think about the concept of digital first. So where innovation first happens in a digital virtual environment before, if ever, imprinted onto the physical world. How would open innovation work like in a metaverse? Maybe we will, meet as avatars at World Open Innovation Conference. We did actually during COVID. We did. I think these are exciting questions, but also not only how open innovation takes place digitally, but I think there are also new questions like we understand quite well, for example, how multiple firms can collaborate for digital innovation in the context of platforms, right? There's a very interesting, thriving research on that. But when talking about getting inspiration from industry, Marisol, this really came from us observing these energy utilities, and we're like, but they don't have a platform. They are not digital natives. They don't have standardized interfaces where they can now just plug in, different software solutions and so on. Yet they are still trying to become more digital, to collaborate with startups that offer digital solutions. So how does that work? Like, how can they work together, do open innovation, if they don't have an interface? And then we actually looked at, okay, how do they do it? How do they build interfaces so that they can then actually do more generative digital innovation? So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff. And then the third aspect is really, Marcel, what you mentioned earlier, these different levels, also looking at these boundary spanners, right? Thinking about how can we enable, people, enable employees, enable open innovation practitioners to really do this boundary spanning effectively. And I think that's going to be important. I think this is something that AI will not be able to do, maybe support, but definitely not replace 100%. So I think that will also be interesting to look at in the future. And a lot more, but I'll limit myself to those three.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. So I think in kind of trying to create some synergy across some of the things that you mentioned. So of course you talk about boundary spanning and openness of different kinds. So I think that's also opening up a kind of a broader perspective on what open innovation really means or how we can work with it. So I think you mentioned the sort of cutting across those levels of analysis, of course also bridging between theory and practice. We talked about that. One thing that just before we conclude, I'm also curious about one specific aspect, which is more cutting across different, let's say, sectors or industries, which I think is something you mentioned that before, right? Working with Carmelo and all, kind of that was one example of how you can do that. Because I personally find it quite a challenge, but I totally agree. This is exactly when we talk about wicked problems, and grand challenges, what we need to do, right? Because open innovation, we often frame it as cutting across different organizational boundaries. But how can we really do that, both as scholars and as practitioners, to be more engaging, especially in the context of wicked problems where we don't even know which sectors maybe we should relate to or technologies and so on. So maybe some final thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's like open innovation on steroids, right? It's like always this next level of like how you can open up. But I definitely agree on openness across industries. I think it's not only the firm boundaries that are becoming permeable and porous, it's also the industry boundaries. Certainly in energy, we see that we have many examples, energy and mobility, for example, with electric vehicles, that boundaries basically not existing anymore, right? But we also have cement companies working on decarbonization with chemical companies. So, for example, they could capture the carbon that they emit and actually build a pipe to the chemical company. The chemical company can use that carbon as their products rather than using, virgin material based on fossil fuel. So I think there are many examples. Everyone is trying to figure that out. I think we haven't really figured that out yet. I think in research, interdisciplinary research is great. It's not well incentivized, right? The way that we are incentivized publishing in specific journals, and so it's hard to do, right? But I think it's interesting. It's on us to kind of try to figure that out.
This is so interesting, and also, of course, looking forward to the conference. But considering the context here in Bilbao, with this the energy hub that we have here led by Iberdrola, which is very interesting. How many companies are in that infrastructure or ecosystem? Because I sometimes look at ecosystems as an infrastructure to move around and work these connections. So we have this very interesting connection across the energy sector, but also these local dynamics with the industrial companies here,
right?
Complementing and going across sectors. So I think that your topic will be also very relevant to what we live day to day here, and I hope that we can learn and get new insights on how to leverage this and get these examples also together with other partners that we have, because we will have very interesting partners are also bringing their experience and many relevant papers related to this uncertainty, and of course some best practices. So I'm sure that we will need something together with all these very, very nice threads.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. And I hope I can help bridge some of these boundaries that we've been talking about, right?
I'm sure you can. Otherwise, we would not have asked you to come, of course.
Right. Otherwise, you will not invite me ever again.
No, you're always welcome. You're always welcome. Don't worry about it. Well, no, but we are really looking forward to it. And I think for us, I think when I asked you initially, I also said it's like closing the loop in some sense, right? So I think it's really nice because you've been, part of building, the community. So I think it's really interesting to hear what you have been working on, how you can contribute, to the theme and the overall, for the overall community. So we are definitely looking forward to that. Yeah, and so with that, I think we will thank you also for contributing to this podcast. Very, very interesting. And we'll see each other soon in Bilbao and hopefully
For some
the other
fantastic food.
also that. Yeah. We forgot
So that's right.
but this goes without saying. No, so
And we're playing this sense of history of what we are bringing forward here. You were talking before when you were a young scholar. I was thinking, well, you are still young. It's good, but
Final story, but I can kind of watch how old WOIC is becoming, because at the very first WOIC, I had a in uterus co-presenter that is now turning 11. So I was highly pregnant during the first WOIC. And now my daughter's almost a teenager, right? So I can see it, every day how old WOIC is becoming.
yeah, that didn't become her name, did it? WOIC. Maybe middle.
Maybe I should have. Not now that you're talking about that. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
No,
Maybe now do it.
WOIC. It does have a bit of a weird ring to it for a girl's name, but okay,
Gella or something.
that's better.
Okay, well,
I would propose that to her. Yeah.
yeah, she can always do. No, good, but yeah. Well, thanks so much, Anne-Kristin. Really appreciate it. And
Thank you, Marcel. Thank you, Marcel.
To your keynote. Yeah, and thanks to the audience, of course, for watching or listening to the podcast. And yeah, the next one is coming up soon also. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned, and we will keep talking about all open innovation related topics. So interesting. Thank you, everyone.